My name is Kimberly, a 34-year-old woman, living with my husband, Mark. We both work at a company founded by my father-in-law. Even though he is already retired, he managed to turn a small construction firm into a $2.5 billion business. He made some aggressive moves, such as acquiring rival construction companies, but everyone praises his exceptional business acumen. Mark, who succeeded his father, was raised as a gentle and pampered young man. While he possesses a gentle personality, I started to feel that his indecisive nature might not be suitable for fulfilling his roles as both a husband and a company executive. Mark himself has said things like, "I'm not cut out to be an executive, so I'll probably just be a figurehead president. That would be more relaxing for me." He doesn't seem to be serious about taking over the company. We've been married for 5 years, but lately, I've been dissatisfied with my husband's lack of initiative. In contrast to my husband, I believe I have the ability to make decisions, and when my father-in-law was active, he seemed to appreciate that and entrusted me with various responsibilities. Before marrying Mark, I worked at a bank, so I've always been conscious of numbers in my work. I quit the bank when I got married and was going to become a full-time housewife, but I ended up working for the construction company at my father-in-law's request. Soon after I started working, my father-in-law included me in executive meetings and listened to my opinions about management. At first, the executives seemed to wonder why the founder's daughter-in-law was involved in important meetings, but they began to listen to me as I provided appropriate opinions. Mark was also an executive but never participated in the meetings, and it seemed natural for both the other executives and my father-in-law. After the meetings, I'd return home to find Mark leisurely watching TV. "Why didn't you attend today's meeting? You're an important executive, so be responsible," I said angrily, and Mark unapologetically replied, "Even if I did attend, I wouldn't understand what's being discussed, and the executives like you better, so it's not a problem." He was saying such things, perhaps because he didn't find my participation in the board meetings amusing. My father-in-law seemed to be grooming me to take over the company, teaching me the ins and outs of running the business. I, new to managing a business, was enjoying the work and striving to meet his expectations. About 2 years after I started attending meetings, my father-in-law fully retired. The executives began consulting me whenever a significant decision was needed, and Mark was ignored. I thought that this situation would make Mark determined to focus on his work, but instead, he became even less committed than before. He would come to the office in the morning but leave somewhere by noon and go straight home. At home, he never talked about work and seemed completely uninterested in the company. Meanwhile, I was getting busier and busier with more responsibilities at work. After my father-in-law retired, the executives began relying on me more, and I was given responsibilities that resembled those of a CEO. The company is large with many employees, and I was working hard to increase sales and profits for their sake. With the hard work of the employees, sales were growing, and I found managing the company more exciting, becoming completely absorbed in my work. On the other hand, Mark seemed to be losing interest in his work, and his presence at the company was dwindling. Our conversations at home were decreasing, and our relationship as a married couple was becoming strained. Then, one day, Mark came home and said, "I ran into your sister today, and we had lunch together." He casually mentioned, "My sister, who is 2 years older, had just divorced about 6 months ago. The cause of the divorce was my sister's affair, and her angry husband had come storming into our family home, causing quite a scene. To calm down my sister's enraged husband, Mark, who had more free time compared to me, went to our family home and dealt with him. With his gentle and carefree manner of persuasion, my pampered husband managed to defuse the situation, and my sister said, 'Being a CEO is amazing.' He easily brushed off my rampaging husband. LOL, she praised him. Perhaps, when confronted with Mark's calm and smiling demeanor, my sister's angry husband just lost his energy. My sister managed to divorce her husband by paying compensation, and ever since this incident, her view of Mark seemed to change. Until then, she seemed to see Mark, who was unimpressive in appearance and indecisive, as nothing more than a rich spoiled brat, but she now seemed to believe he was a competent CEO of a company. My sister had become single again, and for her, who has always loved wealthy men, Mark must have seemed like a good catch, but I, who was engrossed in my work, didn't even imagine such a thing. She had no way of knowing that Mark was just a figurehead executive and not involved in the company's management. Her ex-husband was apparently an elite employee working for a foreign company, and she was bragging to me at the time of her wedding. My husband is an excellent employee, so he earns a good salary, and on top of that, he's handsome, so you must be jealous. My sister's ex-husband indeed had good looks and seemed sharp-minded, always exuding a stylish vibe when he talked. I couldn't understand why my sister would cheat on such a wonderful husband. 3 months after my husband told me he had dinner with my sister, I came home to find him looking unusually serious. "Kimberly, I have something to tell you." It was the first time I had heard such words from him, and I had a bad feeling. As I nervously awaited his words, he said, "The truth is, your sister is pregnant with my child, and I want a divorce." I was shocked by the demand for a divorce, and even more surprised to hear that my sister was pregnant. I was so stunned that I couldn't speak, and my husband continued, "She wants to come here on her next day off and discuss things, so please take care of it." Confused by his request, I asked him, "So, you want to marry my sister?" Mark looked at me with a troubled face and said, "I don't particularly want to marry her, but if a child is involved, we have no choice." I was exasperated by my indecisive husband, and replied with a sigh, "Well, if a child is involved, we may have no choice. Let's discuss it when my sister comes over." Since talking to my husband seemed to lead nowhere, I decided to meet with my sister directly to decide. I had made up my mind to divorce, but I thought I had to consult my father-in-law about the company's affairs. I had been involved in the management as the founder's daughter-in-law, but if I divorced, I would become a complete stranger. The next day, I went to my in-law's house and told my father-in-law what my husband had said. My mother-in-law, who was present, was pleased that a child was on the way, but she became quiet when my father-in-law glared at her. It seemed that she was more concerned about a grandchild than the company's management. After some thought, my father-in-law said with a smile, "Kimberly, you will continue to be involved in the company's management as usual. I don't care about Mark. I'll take responsibility, so do as you please with him." For my father-in-law, the company's management seemed more important than his son or grandchild. Although he had retired, my father-in-law still had influence within the company, and since he held most of the company's stock, there were no executives who would go against his wishes. I was also enjoying my work, so it would have been a shame to give up now. With work settled, it was time to talk to my sister about the future. On her day off, my sister came to my house with a big smile, saying, "Po Kimberly, you couldn't have a child. I'll give you plenty of compensation, haha. Now, get out of this house right away." She said it with a triumphant look. My husband just sat silently, listening to our conversation, saying nothing. Even though he was the main culprit who caused the problem, he was making an irrelevant face, and I was so exasperated with him that I said, "I'm okay with the divorce, but we also need to address compensation and property division. Let's bring in a lawyer and sort it out properly. I never thought you'd end up with someone like Mark. You can't compare to your ex." I said this to my sister with sarcasm. She glared at me with a fierce face for a moment, but soon regained her composure. "I finally understand. It's not about a man's appearance, it's about his inner self." She spoke as if she understood my husband's inner self, and I had to hold back my laughter as I said, "Well, I guess that's good for you. From now on, live happily with Mark." I thought the inner self she meant might mean money. She seemed to have been under the impression that my husband was the CEO of my father-in-law's company, but it didn't seem like she had heard anything from my husband. When the discussion was over, my sister said she was moving in here, and even brought movers from a moving company, so I took what I needed and left. Since my sister is impulsive, I had anticipated this, and had already arranged for a new apartment. I had also hired a lawyer, and had documents prepared for property division and compensation claims. The next day, after moving out my belongings, my lawyer and I began negotiations with my husband and sister on compensation and property division. Again, my husband was just present, making a face as if he was not involved, and my sister did all the talking. As I've said before, I'll pay whatever amount for the compensation, so just decide on your own. Upon hearing my sister's words, the lawyer decided to seek compensation not only from my husband but also from my sister. My sister had previously been ordered to pay compensation to her former husband and is still making payments, so the lawyer had warned me beforehand that seeking compensation from her might be difficult. However, since she herself said that she would pay whatever amount, he decided to make the claim. When it came to the division of property, my sister joyfully said, "This mansion originally belonged to Mark's family, so it won't be included in the division of property, will it?" The lawyer responded emotionlessly to my sister, "This building and land are owned by the company, so it's up to the company to decide." My husband also thought that the house was his father's and said, "Is that so?" "This house wasn't my dad's." He didn't seem too surprised to hear this. On the other hand, my sister frantically snapped at the lawyer. Wait a minute. Does that mean I can't live in this house?" The lawyer answered matter-of-factly, "It's company property, so you can continue to live here if the company approves." Upon hearing these words, my sister's expression seemed to lighten. "Okay, why didn't you say that earlier?" "It's fine because Mark, the CEO, lives here, right?" The lawyer, momentarily surprised, then burst into laughter. "What are you talking about? The CEO is your sister." The lawyer continued to laugh, looking at my sister, who seemed surprised by the revelation. My sister immediately yelled at my husband, "Huh? Mark, you're not the CEO." Instead of my husband, who looked troubled, I explained to her, "Mark is just an advisor without any representative rights. I'm an executive officer, but they made me the CEO. The founder and father-in-law, who had been the CEO all along, made me an executive officer when he retired, and even made me CEO. Other executives also appreciated my achievements, and no one objected. On the contrary, my husband, by his father-in-law's arrangement, was in the position of an advisor without representative rights, receiving an executive salary. Although called an executive salary, he wasn't really working, so the amount was less than that of a regular employee. Therefore, I was bearing all the living expenses. My husband, who didn't care about our household finances, didn't even care whether the house he lived in was company-owned or his father's. Although the house was owned by the company, my responsible father-in-law was collecting rent from me, so I thought it was a regular rental house. The lawyer, laughing, asked me, "Is it okay to continue renting this house to Mark?" My sister reacted to the lawyer's renting part. "What do you mean, rent? You mean charging Mark rent? It's company property, right? Make it free." The lawyer, laughing again at my sister's words, presented the rent amount. Both my sister and my husband were surprised at the amount, as it was the first time they had learned about the rent. Of course, with such a large house, the rent is high. I can't afford it on my salary. With my husband's salary, paying the rent would leave almost no money, making living impossible. Regarding the division of property, during our 5-year marriage, my husband spent all of his low executive salary, and my high salary was consumed by high rent and living expenses, so there was almost no accumulated property, just splitting the savings. After the lawyer left, my sister, who had been expecting to live in this mansion, seemed utterly deflated, looking dazed. My husband was smiling as usual, so I said, "Your mom was happy that you were getting a child, so why don't you move out and go back to your parents' house?" He agreed, but I found myself laughing at why I had to be so considerate of my soon-to-be ex-husband. I began to worry if such an unreliable husband could raise a child, but it had nothing to do with me, so I decided to leave. To my sister, who seemed to have forgotten about her own compensation payment, I tried to confirm, "Sis, are you okay with the compensation payment? You were talking tough, but you're still paying your former husband, right?" She was surprised and looked like she was back to her senses. "Am I supposed to pay compensation too?" My husband frantically retorted to my sister, who looked surprised as if she hadn't heard anything, even though we had discussed this matter today. "You said, 'I'll give you plenty of compensation,' but you're not expecting it from me, are you? My salary is really low." My husband and sister looked at each other with astonished faces. I'm not a liar, but watching these two go back and forth, I feel like bursting into laughter. As for me, I don't care anymore since I've already had them sign the divorce papers and compensation documents, but my husband and sister seem pathetic. My ex-husband, who remarried to my sister, went back to his parents' home, just as I advised, but apparently, she and her in-laws are constantly fighting. The main cause was the discovery that my sister's claim of being pregnant with my ex-husband's child was false. His mother, who had been expecting an heir, was furious. His father, who had resented my sister from the start for taking my ex-husband away from me, apparently never spoke to her. As for the compensation, his father paid for my ex-husband's share and paid me in full, but my sister begged her father-in-law, "Father, please pay my compensation too." "You have no right to call me father," the father-in-law shouted. My sister, who had not gotten anything she expected, said nothing and ran away from my ex-husband's family home and has been missing ever since. It's too stupid, as it seems she only remarried my ex-husband to shoulder the compensation. My ex-husband seems to have considered reconciling with me, but was scolded by his father. "You should never think of having a family. You can't even take care of yourself." I, too, will never reconcile with my ex-husband, having lost trust in him when he cheated on me with my sister, and I was disgusted by his indifferent attitude during our talk. My ex-husband was dismissed from his executive position and resigned, and is now working as a temp. I have continued to be the CEO of my company and am not thinking about remarriage, as I'm enjoying my work. Even after breaking up with my ex-husband, I'm still in touch with my father-in-law and receive various advice when I'm in trouble. For a while, I want to think of myself as married to the company and work hard for the sake of all my employees.